On my granddaughter's wedding day, I noticed my name tag said, "Do not seat." I smiled. Not because it was funny, not because I misunderstood, but because in that exact moment, everything finally made sense. If you've ever felt invisible in a room you helped build, stay with me. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. Because what happened next wasn't loud, but it changed everything. The ballroom was already full when I arrived. Soft golden lights hung from the ceiling like something out of a magazine. White roses everywhere. Crystal glasses catching the light. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. The kind of beauty that feels expensive. Carefully planned. Every detail in place. Except one. Me. I stood near the entrance for a moment, holding my clutch, watching people move past me. No one rushed over. No one said my name. A few polite smiles. A few nods. That was all. Strange. I had raised the bride. My granddaughter, Emily. After her mother, my daughter, passed, she spent more nights in my house than her own. I packed her lunches, sat through her school plays, paid for her first car. And now, I stood at the edge of her wedding like I wasn't sure where I belonged. I reached for the small envelope handed to me at the entrance. Inside was my seating card. Simple, white, elegant, just like everything else. I turned it over. Margaret Hale, and below it, "Do not seat." I looked at it again, just to be sure. The words didn't change. They didn't blur. They didn't soften. They stayed exactly where they were. Clear, deliberate. I let out a small breath. And then, I smiled. Because that wasn't a mistake. Mistakes get corrected. Quietly. Quickly. This had been printed. Placed. Delivered. Someone had decided that I didn't need a seat. At my own granddaughter's wedding, I glanced toward the main tables. Names printed in gold. Immediate family, parents, close relatives. I didn't see mine. Not once. Only then did I start to notice the rest. Where people were sitting. Who was being greeted. Who mattered. And who didn't. My daughter-in-law, Claire, stood near the center of the room. Organizing. Directing. Smiling. Always smiling. She caught my eye for a second. Just a second. Then looked away. Like she hadn't seen me at all. That was new. Claire had always been polite. Careful with her words. But distance, that had started months ago. Subtle at first. Phone calls that got shorter. Plans I wasn't included in. Conversations that stopped when I walked in. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. People get busy. Families change. But now, standing there, holding that small piece of paper, I realized something else. This wasn't distance. It was removal. I walked further into the room. Slowly. Calmly. No rush. No scene. That's not who I am. A young server approached me. "Can I help you find your table, ma'am?" I handed her the card. She looked at it. Then at me. Then back at the card. Her smile faltered. Just slightly. "Oh," she said. Quietly. I'm not sure." Of course she wasn't. Because there was no table. I took the card back. "It's all right," I said. "I'll stand." She nodded quickly and walked away. I didn't stop her. I didn't ask questions. Because the answers were already there. In black ink. On white paper. "Do not seat." I moved toward the back of the room. Near the bar. Not hidden. Just not central. From there, I could see everything. The guests. The tables. The stage where Emily would soon walk. And Claire. Always moving. Always in control. I watched her greet vendors. Check details. Adjust placements. Like she owned the entire event. And maybe, in her mind, she did. Because this wedding, this beautiful, carefully planned wedding, wasn't just Emily's. It was a display. Of control. Of image. Of who belonged. And who didn't. I looked down at the card again. Ran my finger over the words. And that's when something else came back to me. A conversation. Weeks ago, Claire had said, "We've got everything covered. You don't need to worry about the expenses." I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? I had already transferred the money. Months earlier. For wedding support. Her words. Not mine. I trusted her. Just like I had trusted every form she handed me. Every number she explained. Every decision she said was best for the family. I slipped the card back into my clutch. And lifted my head. Because suddenly, this wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about something much bigger. And for the first time that day, I wasn't confused. I was paying attention. I stayed near the back of the room as guests continued to arrive. Laughter filled the space. Glasses clinked. Music drifted softly from a string quartet near the stage. Everything moved exactly as it should. Smooth. Effortless. Perfect. From the outside, There was nothing wrong. That's what made it so easy to miss. I leaned lightly against the bar, watching the room settle into its rhythm. Tables filling, people taking their seats, names being called, introductions made. And slowly, I started noticing patterns. The family table was full. Claire at the center, Daniel beside her. My son. He hadn't looked at me once. Not when I walked in. Not when I stood there holding that card. Not even now. That hurt more than the words. But I didn't let it show. I never do. A woman approached me. Mid-50s. Elegant dress. Familiar face. "Oh, Margaret, right?" she said. I nodded. "Yes. I'm one of Claire's friends. I've heard so much about you." Of course she had. I smiled politely. "That's kind of you." She glanced around. "Which table are you at?" I didn't answer immediately, just held her gaze for a moment, then said, "I'm not seated." Her expression shifted. Confusion first, then something softer. "Oh, I'm sure it's just a mix-up." I nodded. "I'm sure." But we both knew it wasn't. She excused herself shortly after, and I went back to watching, because observing tells you more than asking ever will. Claire moved through the room like she belonged at the center of everything, and in many ways, she had made sure she was. The vendors spoke to her. The planner checked in with her. Even the photographer adjusted angles based on her direction. That was new. At Emily's engagement party last year, Claire had barely been involved. Now she controlled everything, including who sat where. I shifted slightly, letting my eyes move toward the head table again. Emily was there now, radiant, smiling, happy. She looked exactly how a bride should look. And for a moment, I felt something soften inside me, because none of this was her fault. Or at least, I didn't think it was. Not yet. Then I saw it. A small detail. Easy to miss. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. On the table in front of Claire was a folder. Thin, cream-colored. The same kind she used at home. For organizing finances. Documents. Accounts. I recognized it instantly, because I had signed papers from that exact folder before. And suddenly, the wedding didn't just feel expensive. It felt familiar. Too familiar. I looked around again. The decorations. The scale. The details. This wasn't just well planned. It was funded. Carefully. Strategically. And I already knew whose accounts had been adjusted over the past year. I reached into my clutch again. Pulled out my phone this time. Scrolled. Found something I hadn't looked at in weeks. Bank notifications. Transfers. Amounts I had approved. Without really reading. Because I trusted her. Because she said it was for the family. I locked my phone. Slid it back in place. And exhaled slowly. The music shifted. Guests turned toward the stage. The ceremony was about to begin. People found their seats. Chairs filled. Voices quieted. And me? I remained standing. At the back. Exactly where that card had placed me. Do not seat. I almost laughed. Not out loud. Just inside. Because now I understood something Claire clearly didn't. A seat isn't what gives you position. And removing someone quietly doesn't mean they're gone. It just means you haven't realized what they still hold. I lifted my head, eyes moving across the room one more time. From Emily, to Daniel, to Claire. And I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel out of place. I felt certain, because whatever this was, whatever had been done, it wasn't finished yet. Not even close. The ceremony began without me. I stood where I had been standing the entire time. Near the back. Unassigned. Unnoticed. The music shifted into something softer. Slower. The kind of music that tells people to pay attention. Guests turned toward the aisle. Phones lifted. Smiles widened. And just like that, the room forgot everything else. Including me. Emily walked in on her father's arm. White dress. Simple. Elegant. She looked happy. Genuinely happy. And for a moment, I let myself feel that. Because whatever had been done, whatever had been arranged behind the scenes, she didn't look like she knew. Her eyes scanned the room briefly as she walked, looking for familiar faces. Important faces. I watched closely. Not hoping. Just watching. Her gaze passed over the front tables. Then the middle. Then the sides. But it never reached the back. Not where I stood. Not where I had been placed. Do not seat. I lowered my eyes slightly. Not in shame. Just in understanding. Because this wasn't an accident of logistics. It was design. Careful. Intentional. Quiet. The officiant began speaking. Words about love. About family. About commitment. The kind of words people expect to hear. The kind that sound right, even when they don't feel true. I listened. But not to the ceremony. To the room. The way people reacted. The way Claire moved even now. Subtle, but present. She leaned toward the planner once. Whispered something. The planner nodded immediately. Adjusted something near the aisle. Even during the ceremony, she was still controlling the details. That wasn't normal. Not at this level. Not this consistently. I shifted my weight slightly, crossed my arms loosely, and kept watching. Because once you stop expecting, you start seeing. A server passed behind me quietly, carrying a tray, glasses of champagne, prepared for the next part. The celebration. The part where everything becomes louder, looser, less controlled. That's when people make mistakes. That's when things slip. And I had a feeling. Something already had. I glanced toward the head table again. That folder was still there. In front of Claire. Unmoved. Unhidden. As if she didn't think anyone would recognize it. Or maybe, she didn't think anyone was paying attention. I tilted my head slightly. Let my eyes rest on it just a moment longer. Same color. Same thickness. Same placement style she used at home. For months, she had handled family finances. Her words. She had offered. Daniel had agreed. And I had signed. Transfers. Adjustments. Temporary reallocations. I remembered that phrase now. Clearer than before. At the time, it sounded responsible. Helpful. Now, it sounded precise. Calculated. The officiant's voice rose slightly. A cue. The vows. People leaned forward. Attentive. Emotional. But my focus stayed elsewhere. Because something didn't add up. This wedding. It wasn't just expensive. It was layered. Every detail aligned with a budget that didn't come from one place. And I knew exactly how much Emily and her fiancé made. I knew their limits. Their habits. Their reality. This wasn't that. I reached into my clutch again. Slowly. Deliberately. Pulled out my phone. Kept it low. Out of sight. Scrolled through messages. Old ones. From Claire. Just moving funds for the venue deposit. Adjusting accounts for catering. Covering floral expenses temporarily. Temporarily. That word again. I paused. Then opened my banking app. Didn't need to scroll far. The numbers were there. Large. Repeated. Structured. Not random. Not occasional. Systematic. I locked the screen. Slipped the phone back. And exhaled quietly. Because now, the picture was clearer. Not complete. But clear enough. This wasn't just about a seat. This wasn't just about being excluded. This was about ownership, control, and presentation. Who paid? And who was seen? The vows ended. Applause filled the room. People stood, smiled, celebrated. I stayed where I was. Still, quiet, unmoved. Because applause doesn't change reality. The couple kissed. The room warmed. Emotion spread. But underneath it, something else remained. Something colder. More deliberate. The music picked up again. Transitioning. Guiding the room into the next phase. Reception. Movement returned. Guests shifted. Servers moved faster. Energy changed. And with that shift, so did the control. This was Claire's part. Not the ceremony. The execution. The management. The outcome. I watched as she stood. Adjusted her posture. Picked up the folder. Finally. Held it close. Not openly. But not hidden either. Then she turned slightly. Spoke to one of the coordinators. Pointed toward the tables. Gave direction. Clear. Confident. Unquestioned. I followed her movement with my eyes. Not with emotion. With focus. Because whatever was inside that folder, it mattered. And she knew it. I took a step forward. Just one. Out. Of the shadow of the back wall. Into the light of the room. Not enough for attention. Just enough for position. Because I wasn't standing back anymore. Not really. Not the way she thought. Because the moment I understood was the moment things began to shift. And Claire had no idea it had already started. The reception started quickly. Too quickly. Chairs filled. Music rose. Laughter returned. And just like that, the ceremony was over. People relaxed. That's when things become less controlled. Less careful. I moved slowly along the edge of the room. Not toward the center. Not yet. Just enough to change my angle. To see things differently. Claire was already in motion. Folder in hand. Speaking to the planner again. Her voice low. Direct. The planner nodded more than once. Adjusted the seating chart near the entrance. Switched a few place cards. Small changes. But not random ones. I stopped a few steps away. Close enough to observe. Far enough not to be included. The planner flipped through a printed sheet. Rows of names. Tables. Assignments. Claire pointed to one line. The planner hesitated, just briefly, then crossed something out. Rewrote it. I didn't need to see the name. I already knew how this worked, because I had seen that same motion before. At my own kitchen table. Months ago. Documents laid out. Pages stacked. Claire guiding the process. Just a small adjustment. That's temporary. This will make everything easier later. I had believed her, because nothing she did ever looked rushed or careless. Everything had a reason, a structure, a purpose. That was her strength. And now, I was seeing it applied here. In real time. The planner walked away. Claire stayed behind for a second, closed the folder halfway, and for the first time, she looked around. Not at the guests, not at the room, at the details. Checking, confirming, making sure everything aligned. Her eyes passed over me. This time, she didn't look away immediately. There was a pause. Short, but deliberate. Then she smiled. Small, controlled, and turned back to her work. That smile told me something. She wasn't worried. Not yet. That meant she believed everything was still under control. Which meant she didn't know what I had seen, or what I had started to understand. I turned slightly. Let my attention shift toward the service area, where the staff gathered between rounds. That's where information moves fastest. Unfiltered. A young server was speaking quietly with another. Payment hasn't cleared yet. She said it would be handled. We're just waiting. I didn't step closer. I didn't interrupt, but I listened, because that sentence mattered. Payment hasn't cleared. Handled. Waiting. Those aren't words you hear at an event like this. Not one this polished. Not one this complete. Unless something underneath wasn't as stable as it looked. I walked a little further, picked up a glass of water from a tray, held it lightly, not drinking, just blending in. A guest brushed past me, apologized without looking. I nodded. It didn't matter. Nothing here was personal. Not on the surface, but underneath. Everything was. I glanced again toward the head table. Claire had returned to her seat. The folder was open now, just slightly. Enough for her to see inside. Not enough for others. Daniel leaned toward her. Said something. She responded without looking at him. Eyes still on the pages. That told me more than words ever could. This wasn't shared control. It was directed, managed, structured around her. I shifted my gaze to Emily again. She was laughing now, talking with guests, unaware, or choosing to be. I couldn't tell yet. But what I did know was that she wasn't running this event. Not really. And if she wasn't running it, then someone else was. And that someone was using resources that didn't fully belong to them. I set the glass down on a nearby table, untouched, because I didn't need distractions anymore. I needed clarity, and I was getting it, piece by piece, detail by detail. The folder, the planner, the payments, the seating, the words. Do not seat. It wasn't about space. It was about position, visibility, control over perception. If I wasn't seated, I wasn't seen. If I wasn't seen, I wasn't connected. If I wasn't connected, then no one would question where the support came from, or who provided it. I exhaled slowly. Let that settle. Because now, the structure was becoming clear. This wasn't exclusion for comfort. It was exclusion for narrative. A story being told in real time. And I had been written out of it. Quietly, deliberately, completely. Or at least, that's what she thought. I looked toward the entrance again, where the seating chart stood. Revised, adjusted, controlled. Then back to Claire, still holding that folder, still moving the pieces. And I realized something simple, something important. She had accounted for everything, except one thing, me paying attention. And that was where the plan began to change. I didn't move toward Claire. Not yet. Instead, I stepped closer to the service hallway, the place guests rarely notice, but where everything important actually happens. Staff moved in and out, carrying trays, checking lists, whispering updates that never reached the main room. That's where the real version of an event lives. Not on the stage, not at the tables. Behind it, I stood just far enough not to be questioned, close enough to hear. A man in a black suit, event manager, by the look of him, was speaking to a woman holding a tablet. We still don't have final confirmation, he said quietly. She frowned. She told me it was already taken care of. He shook his head. Not fully. We've got partials. But the balance, it's still pending. Pending. That word again. It followed me now. From the bank. To the wedding. To this exact moment. I didn't react. Didn't step in. Just listened. Because this wasn't about confronting anyone. Not yet. This was about understanding how deep it went. The woman glanced toward the ballroom. Toward Claire. Should we bring it up now? She asked. The man hesitated, then said, not during the reception. Of course not. Appearances matter, especially when they've been carefully constructed. Give it another hour, he added. If it's not resolved, we'll need to escalate. Escalate. Another word that didn't belong in a place like this. Not in a wedding. Not in a room filled with flowers and music and smiles. But there it was. Underneath everything. I stepped away before they could notice me. Back into the main room, where everything still looked perfect. Where? Nothing seemed wrong. Claire was standing again, speaking with someone near the bar. Still holding the folder. Still composed. Still confident. If she knew there was a delay, she wasn't showing it. Or maybe, she thought she could manage it. Like everything else, I walked slowly along the side of the room, letting my eyes adjust to the contrast between what was being presented and what was actually happening. The difference was becoming clearer. This wedding wasn't fully paid for. Not yet. Which meant one thing. The money hadn't all come from where it was supposed to. Or, it had been moved, reallocated, used in a way that required timing. Careful timing. I reached into my clutch again. Not for my phone this time. For something else. A folded receipt. Old, but not forgotten. From 3 months ago. A transfer. Large. Labeled simply, event support. Claire had asked for it. Explained it as a temporary measure. To secure vendors. To hold dates. To make things easier. I hadn't questioned it. Because she sounded certain. Because Daniel agreed. Because it was for Emily. And now, standing in the middle of that event, I realized something simple. That transfer hadn't been temporary. It had been foundational. The base layer of everything I was looking at. I slid the receipt back into my bag. Closed it carefully. Because I didn't need proof anymore. Not for myself. I already knew. The question now was, what did Claire think she controlled? And what did she actually control? There's a difference. A significant one. I moved closer to one of the side tables. Still empty. Unassigned. Just like I had been. I ran my fingers lightly across the back of one of the chairs. Smooth. Polished. Prepared. For someone who never arrived. Or someone who had been removed. Either way, the space existed. Even if the name didn't. I turned slightly. Watching Claire again. She was speaking more quickly now. Not rushed. But sharper. Focused. The planner nodded less. Asked more questions. That shift was small. But real. And Claire noticed it. I could tell. Because her posture changed. Just slightly. Less relaxed. More deliberate. Control. Requires constant reinforcement. And when something underneath starts to slip, you feel it first in the details. She adjusted the folder. Closed it fully this time. Held it tighter. Then walked toward the exit for a moment. Phone in hand. Speaking quietly. Too quietly for anyone else to hear. But not too quietly to notice. I watched her step outside. Just for a minute. Maybe two. Then return. Same expression. Same composure. But something had shifted. Just beneath the surface. And that was enough. Because cracks don't appear all at once. They start small. Hidden. Easy to ignore. Until they're not. I lifted my head slightly. Let my gaze move across the room one more time. The guests. The tables. The stage. The image. Everything still looked perfect. Exactly as it was meant to. But now I could see the structure underneath. And more importantly, I could see where it depended on something fragile. Something unfinished. Something that hadn't been fully secured. And that meant one thing. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because Claire had built something impressive. Carefully. Quietly. But she had built it on timing. On assumptions. On control that required everything to go exactly as planned. And plans don't always hold. Not when someone else finally understands them. I adjusted my posture. Stepped slightly closer to the center of the room. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to change my position. Because I wasn't at the edge anymore. Not in the way she thought. Not in the way that card suggested. Do not seat. I almost smiled again. Because the more I saw, the clearer it became. She hadn't removed me. She had underestimated me. And that is where everything begins to shift. The music grew louder as the reception settled into its rhythm. Laughter returned. Glasses lifted. Conversations overlapped. From the outside, everything was working. Exactly as planned. But I wasn't watching the outside anymore. I was watching the timing. Because that's where control lives. And that's where it breaks. I moved closer to the bar again. Not to drink. Just to stay in motion. Still invisible. Still unassigned. still exactly where that card had placed me, and yet, more aware than anyone else in the room. Claire re-entered the main floor with her usual composure, phone no longer in hand, folder back under her arm. She walked directly to the planner, spoke, listened, nodded, then adjusted something on the schedule sheet. The planner hesitated again, only for a second, but this time, I saw it clearly. Doubt, not resistance, not yet, just uncertainty. And uncertainty spreads. Quietly, I leaned slightly against the counter, watching without watching, because people don't notice observation when it looks like stillness. Claire turned toward the head table, called Daniel over. He approached quickly. She spoke to him in a low voice. His expression changed, subtle, but visible, a tightening around the eyes, a pause before responding. He nodded, but slower this time, less automatic. Then he glanced across the room, toward the service area, toward the back, toward me. For the first time that day, his eyes found mine. Not fully, not intentionally, but enough, just a fraction of a second. Then he looked away. That was all it took, because that look wasn't recognition. It was awareness. Something had shifted, and he felt it, even if he didn't understand it yet. Claire followed his glance, just slightly. Her eyes moved in my direction, then past me, then back to the planner. But this time, her movements weren't as smooth, still controlled, but more deliberate, more careful, which meant one thing. The structure was holding, but barely. I stepped away from the bar, walked slowly toward one of the side corridors. Not the service area this time. A quieter hallway, leading toward the restrooms. Mirrors lined the wall. Soft lighting. Neutral space. Away from the performance. I stopped there for a moment. Looked at my reflection. Same dress. Same posture. Same calm expression. Nothing had changed on the outside. And that was exactly the point. Because everything that mattered had changed somewhere else. I reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, opened my banking app again. Not to check numbers. I already knew them. To check timing. The last transfer. The pending confirmations. The approvals that required my authorization. They were still there. Unprocessed. Waiting. Just like the vendor payments. Just like the balances behind this wedding. Connected. Not by coincidence. By design. I locked the screen. Slid the phone back into place. And exhaled slowly. Because now, the timeline was clear. Claire had moved funds early. Covered deposits. Secured vendors. Created the image. But the final layer, the completion, still depended on something outside her control. Something she assumed would follow. Automatically. Quietly. Without question. Me. I turned away from the mirror. Walked back toward the main room. Same pace. Same calm. But this time, I wasn't observing anymore. I was aligning. Claire was near the dance floor now. Speaking with the DJ. Adjusting the order of events. Moving things forward. Or maybe, trying to. Because something about her movement had changed. Slightly faster. Slightly tighter. Still invisible to most. But not to me. The planner approached her again. Said something. Claire listened. Then responded. Short. Direct. The planner didn't nod this time. Not immediately. She asked another question. Claire answered again. This time, with a pause. Small. But real. I watched it happen. Right there. In the middle of a room full of people celebrating. A single moment of delay. A hesitation in control. And that's all it takes. I moved a little closer. Not enough to be noticed. Just enough to hear fragments. We need confirmation. It's already being handled. We can't proceed without. Claire cut her off. Quietly, but firmly. It will be handled. The planner nodded. But not with certainty. With obligation. That difference matters. Because obligation doesn't hold under pressure. I stepped back again. Let the space return between us. Because I didn't need to be closer. I already had what I needed. Understanding. Clarity. Timing. I glanced once more at the seating chart near the entrance. Rewritten. Adjusted. Controlled. My name wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. It had never been meant to be. Do not seat. I almost said it out loud this time. Just to hear how it sounded. But I didn't. Because the words didn't matter anymore. Not in the way they had at the beginning. Now, they meant something else. Not exclusion. Not absence. Just miscalculation. I turned back toward the center of the room, where everything still looked perfect, where everyone still believed it was. And I realized something simple. Claire had built this entire event on the assumption that I would remain exactly where she placed me. Silent. Uninvolved. Unaware. But she hadn't accounted for one thing. What happens when the person you removed decides to step back in. Not loudly, not suddenly, but precisely, at the exact moment. Everything depends on them. The first sign didn't come from Claire. It came from the DJ. A small thing. Easy to miss. He leaned toward the planner. Said something. She checked her tablet. Then looked toward Claire. Again. That pattern had started repeating. Check. Pause. Look at Claire. Wait. Not act. That wasn't how events like this were supposed to run. Not at this level. Not with this kind of budget. I stayed where I was. Near the edge. But not outside anymore. Because now, I could feel the timing tightening. Like a clock moving towards something inevitable. Claire noticed it too. Of course she did. Her movements became more frequent. Less fluid. Still controlled. But no longer effortless. She moved from the DJ. To the planner. To the service entrance. Then back again. Always returning to that folder. As if everything she needed was inside it. Or maybe, everything she feared losing. Daniel followed her once. Tried to speak. She answered quickly. Dismissively. Not rude. Just final. He stepped back. Didn't insist. That told me more than anything else. He wasn't in control. He wasn't even informed. He was included, but not involved. That distinction matters. I shifted slightly. Let my eyes move toward the service hallway again. 2 staff members were speaking now. More urgently. They're asking again. We can't delay much longer. She said it would be covered. Another word that doesn't belong in celebration. Not like this. Not repeated. I picked up a glass of water again. This time, I took a sip. Not because I needed it. Because it gave me a reason to stand still. To stay present. To observe without being observed. Claire stepped back into the room. Phone in hand again. Her voice low. Sharp. Different now. No longer soft. No longer smooth. There was pressure in it. No. It needs to clear now. I already confirmed that. I'm not doing this in the middle of the reception. She turned slightly. Away from the crowd. Away from the image. Toward the wall. That's where real conversations happen. Out of sight. But not invisible. Not to me. I watched her finish the call. Her posture changed when she hung up. Subtle. But unmistakable. A breath held too long. Released. Shoulders adjusting. Just slightly. Then she turned back. Smiled again. Returned to the room. As if nothing had happened. That's the part most people believe. The smile. The surface. But I had already seen what was underneath. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The planner approached her again. This time, closer. More direct. I couldn't hear every word. But I didn't need to. We need confirmation. They're asking for final approval. Claire responded quickly. Too quickly. It's already handled. The planner didn't move. Didn't nod. Didn't step away. That was new. Claire noticed it. Of course she did. And for the first time, there was something else in her expression. Not panic. Not yet. But something close. A calculation that didn't resolve immediately. That's when it happens. The moment control stops being automatic and starts requiring effort. I stepped forward again. One step. Then another. Still not enough to draw attention. Just enough to close the distance. Because this part required proximity. The DJ adjusted something on his console. Music shifted. Not drastically, but enough to fill space. To cover silence. To maintain flow. That's what professionals do. They protect the experience. Even when something underneath starts to slip. Guests didn't notice. Why would they? They were dancing. Laughing. Taking photos. Living inside the version of the night that had been created for them. But behind that version, things were changing. Claire turned again. Looking for someone. The planner. The manager. Daniel. Someone who could confirm that everything was still moving forward. But confirmation wasn't coming as easily anymore. I watched her walk toward the service entrance. Faster this time. The folder still in her hand. Held tighter. Closer. As if distance from it would change something. It wouldn't. Because the issue wasn't in the folder. It was in the system behind it. The part she didn't fully control. The part she assumed would respond. Automatically. Just like before. Just like always. But assumptions break under pressure. And this was pressure. I followed at a distance. Not directly. Just enough to stay within sight. She stopped just before entering the service area. Spoke to the manager again. This time, he didn't lower his voice as much. We need this cleared before we continue. We can't proceed without authorization. Authorization. That word landed clearly. Even from where I stood. Claire paused. Just for a second. Then said something I had been waiting to hear. It's coming from the same account. Same account. I almost smiled. Because now, there was no doubt, no question, no ambiguity. Everything led back to the same place, the same source, the same assumption, that I would continue, without interruption, without awareness, without involvement. But that assumption was already broken. Claire turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room again. Faster this time, more focused. And this time, she saw me, not as a passing glance, not as background. She saw me, really saw me, standing there, calm, still, watching. And for the first time that night, she didn't look away immediately, because something in her expression had changed. She wasn't just managing anymore. She was calculating. And now, she was including me in that calculation. That's when it happens. The shift. The moment someone realizes the person they removed was never actually gone, and that everything they built still depends on them. Claire didn't look away this time. She held my gaze. Not long. Just enough to confirm something had changed. Then she turned back toward the manager. Her voice dropped again. Lower. Sharper. Controlled. But no longer smooth. I told you, it's being handled. The manager didn't respond immediately. That was new. Before, he nodded, stepped back, followed her lead. Now he waited. And waiting creates pressure. I understand. He said finally. But we need confirmation before the next phase. Next phase. That meant something specific. Cake. Speeches. Final transitions. Moments that require everything to be settled. Not pending. Not assumed. Confirmed. Claire exhaled slowly. Just once. Then nodded. I'll take care of it. She stepped away. This time, directly toward me. Not rushing. Not dramatic. Just intentional. The space between us closed quietly. No one noticed. Why would they? The music was louder now. People were dancing. Laughing. Celebrating a version of the night that still looked perfect. But underneath, everything had started to shift. Claire stopped a few feet away. Close enough now. Close enough to speak without being overheard. Her expression was composed. Carefully. But her eyes were different. You've been standing all evening, she said. Her voice was soft, measured, almost polite. I nodded slightly. Yes. A pause. Short. Calculated. We can find you a seat, she added. I looked at her. Not at the room. Not at the tables. At her. I thought I wasn't supposed to have one. Her expression didn't break. But something behind it did. Just slightly. That must have been a mistake, she said. Mistake. There it was. The word she needed now. The word that rewrites intention. I tilted my head just a fraction. Printed mistakes usually don't make it to the final version, I said. She didn't respond immediately. Because she knew that was true. We stood there for a moment. Not arguing. Not escalating. Just holding position. Then she shifted. Subtly. Changed direction. This isn't the time for misunderstandings, she said quietly. Not a request. Not an apology. A redirect. I nodded once. You're right, I said. And I meant it. Because this wasn't the time for misunderstandings. This was the time for clarity. Her eyes searched mine. Trying to read something. Trying to understand how much I knew. How far I had gone. What I had already seen. I gave her nothing. Just calm. Just stillness. Just presence. That's harder to read than emotion. Much harder. Behind her, I saw the manager again. Watching. Waiting. Not approaching. But not leaving either. Claire noticed him too. Of course. She did. That's why she was here. Not to apologize. Not to fix the seating. To manage risk. And now, I was part of that equation. I just need a moment, she said. Still looking at me. Still measured. I nodded again. Take your time. That was the first moment she hesitated. Because that wasn't resistance. It wasn't confrontation. It was permission. And permission removes control. She turned away. Walked back toward the service area. Faster now. No pause. No redirection. The folder still in her hand. But no longer held the same way. Tighter. Closer. Like it mattered more now. I stayed where I was. Didn't follow. Didn't move. Because this part didn't require action. It required timing. The DJ announced something. A transition. Speeches were about to begin. Guests started moving again. Toward tables. Toward their assigned places. The structure returning. Order being reestablished. Except, not completely. Because one piece was still unresolved. I walked slowly toward the side of the room again. Near the same unassigned table. Still empty. Still waiting. Like it had been all evening. I rested my hand lightly on the back of one chair. Felt the smooth wood beneath my fingers. Prepared. but in used, just like the position I had been given. Or rather, not given. I glanced toward the service entrance again. Claire was still there, speaking, listening, her posture tighter now, less fluid, more controlled, but control under pressure looks different. It takes effort, and effort leaves signs. The manager spoke again, this time louder. Not enough for the room, but enough for me. We can't move forward without authorization. Authorization. That word again. Clear. Final. Non-negotiable. Claire said something in response. Too low to hear. But her tone carried something new. Urgency. Not panic. Not yet. But closer than before. I looked around the room one more time. The guests. The lights. The music. Everything still looked exactly as it should. Exactly as it was meant to be seen. But I wasn't looking at that anymore. I was looking at the structure underneath. The part that depended on something unseen. Something assumed. Something not yet completed. And I knew exactly what. That was. I reached into my clutch again. Not for my phone. Not for anything visible. Just to feel it. The weight of something small. But decisive. Because sometimes, control doesn't come from standing at the center. Or holding the folder. Or directing the room. Sometimes, it comes from knowing exactly when to let something stop. Claire stepped back into the room. Her expression reset. Composed again. Controlled again. But not the same. Not quite. Because now, she knew. Something wasn't following the plan. And more importantly, she knew I knew it too. Our eyes met again. Just for a second. And this time, she didn't try to look away first. Because now, there was no pretending. No misunderstanding. No distance. Just two people. Standing in the same room. Looking at the same situation. From very different positions. And only one of us was still in control. The announcement for speeches came right on time. Or at least, it was supposed to. The DJ stepped forward. Smiled. Tapped the microphone lightly. All right, everyone. If we could have your attention. Voices softened. Chairs filled again. Glasses lowered. The room shifted back into structure. Into expectation. This was one of those moments. Planned. Visible. Important. The kind that can't be delayed without people noticing. I watched Claire closely. She was already moving toward the head table. Folder still in hand. But this time, she didn't open it. She held it closed. Tight. Like she already knew what was inside wouldn't help her now. The planner approached her again. Closer than before. No distance. No softness. We need confirmation before we start, she said. Clear. Direct. Claire nodded quickly. Just begin, she replied. The planner didn't move. Didn't nod. Didn't step away. The pause stretched. Just a few seconds. But long enough. Because silence in a moment like this is louder than anything else. Guests started to notice. Not the words. The delay. The slight break in flow. The DJ glanced over. Waiting. The planner shook her head. Subtle. But firm. We can't, she said. Claire's expression stayed composed. But her eyes changed. That was the first real shift. Not calculation. Not control. Something else. Something closer to pressure. I remained where I was. Still. Watching. Because this wasn't the moment to move. This was the moment to let things unfold. Naturally. Claire leaned closer to the planner. Lowered her voice. I told you, it's being handled. The planner didn't lower hers. Not this time. We've been told that 3 times, she said. And it hasn't cleared. Cleared. There it was. Out loud now. Not hidden. Not contained in the service hallway. Not whispered between staff. Spoken. In the open. Not loud enough for the entire room. But loud enough for the structure to crack. Claire straightened slightly. Her hand tightened around the folder. Daniel stood up from his seat. Walked toward them. What's going on? He asked. His voice was low. But not calm. Not fully. The planner glanced at him. Then back at Claire. We need final authorization before we proceed with the scheduled events, she said. Professional. Measured. But no longer flexible. Daniel frowned. Authorization for what? Claire answered before the planner could. It's just a processing delay, she said quickly. Everything's already arranged. The planner didn't contradict her. But she didn't agree either. That silence again. That gap between words and reality. Daniel looked between them. Then at the planner. How long? He asked. Another simple question. One that required a real answer. Without confirmation? The planner replied. We can't proceed. The music had already softened. The DJ wasn't speaking anymore. Waiting. Watching. Guests shifting in their seats. Some whispering. Some glancing toward the head table. Not understanding. But noticing. That's all it takes. Not clarity. Just awareness. Claire turned slightly, scanning the room again. Her eyes moved faster now, looking for solutions, looking for control. And then, they landed on me, standing exactly where I had been. Still, calm, unmoved. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked toward me, not slowly, not casually, direct. Every step measured, every movement deliberate. The distance between us closed again, faster than before. She stopped just in front of me, close enough that no one else could hear, but not so close that it looked private, carefully balanced. This needs to be resolved now, she said. No softness, no redirect, just truth. I looked at her, not at the room, not at the situation, at her. Yes, I said. It does. A pause. Short, heavy. Her voice dropped. Lower. You know what this is about. Not a question, a statement. I didn't respond immediately. I let the moment sit. Because silence carries weight, especially when someone is waiting for an answer. Then I said, I understand it. That wasn't the same thing. And she knew it. Her eyes tightened slightly, not in anger, in recognition. Because now, she wasn't managing an event. She was managing a risk. And that risk was standing right in front of her. We don't have time for this, she said. Still controlled, but sharper now. This isn't the moment for delays. I nodded slightly. You're right. Another pause. This one longer. Because now, she needed something specific. Something only one person could provide. And she knew it. You need to authorize the final transfer, she said. There it was. Clear. Direct. No more layers. No more language. Just truth. I looked at her. Held her gaze. Calm. Still. Unmoved. Then I said, I already did what I was asked to do. Her expression didn't break. But it shifted. Again. Because that wasn't the answer she needed. It wasn't a refusal. But it wasn't compliance either. And in a moment like this, that difference matters. Behind her, I could feel the room changing. The silence stretching. The delay becoming visible. Not dramatic. Not chaotic. Just undeniable. Claire took a breath. Slow. Measured. Then said quietly, This can't stop here. I tilted my head slightly. It already has, I replied. Not loudly. Not emotionally. Just accurately. And that's when it happened. The moment everything moved from control to consequence. Because for the first time that night, Claire wasn't directing the situation anymore. She was reacting to it. And that changes everything. The silence didn't break all at once. It stretched. Quiet. Uncomfortable. Noticeable. The kind of silence that makes people shift in their seats without knowing why. The DJ looked toward the planner again. Waiting. The planner didn't give him anything. No signal. No nod. Nothing to move forward. And without that, everything stopped. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But enough. Enough for people to start whispering. To glance at each other. To look toward the head table. Toward Claire. Toward the center of the room. Where control was supposed to be. Daniel stepped closer. His voice lower now. More urgent. What's going on? He asked again. This time, not casually. Not as a guest. As someone who expected an answer. Claire didn't look at him. Her attention stayed on me. Locked. Focused. Because she knew. The answer wasn't with the planner. Or the DJ. Or the manager. It was here. Right in front of her. We need to move forward, she said quietly. Her voice steady. But thinner now. We will, I replied. Just as calm. Just as controlled. Another pause. Behind her, the planner took a step forward. Ms. Hale, she said carefully. We're at a point where we can't continue without final confirmation. Claire didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge her. Not yet. Because acknowledging that would make it real. Would bring it fully into the room. Instead, she spoke to me. Still quiet. Still contained. You're holding this up. Not an accusation. A fact. I tilted my head slightly. No, I said. I'm not moving it. That difference mattered. Because stopping something and not continuing it are not the same. Claire understood that. Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. Then she took a small step closer. Lowered her voice even more. Everyone is waiting, she said. I glanced past her. At the room. At the guests. At Emily. Still seated. Still smiling. But now, asking something quietly to the person beside her. Not fully aware. But aware enough. The moment was slipping. Slowly. But visibly. Yes, I said. They are. Claire followed my gaze for a second. Then back to me. This isn't the time for this, she said. Not as controlled now. Still quiet. But sharper. I nodded. You've said that already. A pause. Then she changed approach. Again. That's what she does. Adapts. Redirects. Reframes. This is Emily's day, she said. Her voice softer again. Appealing now. Not controlling. That's why we need to. Continue. I held her gaze. I agree. And I meant it. But agreement doesn't mean compliance. And she knew that too. The planner stepped in again. Closer this time. More visible. We need authorization to proceed with the remaining schedule, she said. Clear. Professional. But now. Audible. Not just to us. To those nearby. Heads turned. Not many. Just enough. Because awareness spreads quietly. Like everything else tonight. Daniel stepped between us slightly. Not fully. But enough to feel the shift. Mom, he said. The word landed differently now. Not distant. Not automatic. More present. We just need to fix this. Fix. Another word. Simple. But revealing. Because fixing assumes something broke. I looked at him. Really looked this time. Not as a child. Not as someone to protect. As someone who had made decisions. Who had chosen sides. Who had stayed silent. I didn't break anything, I said. Calm. Steady. True. He hesitated. Just for a second. Because he knew that was also true. Claire stepped around him slightly. Reclaiming position. This isn't about that, she said. Of course it wasn't. Not to her. This is about moving forward. Forward. Always forward. Never backward. Never questioning how things got here. I nodded once. Then move forward, I said. She held my gaze. Waiting. Because she needed something specific. And she wasn't getting it. The planner spoke again. Louder this time. Not intentionally. But enough. We cannot proceed without account authorization. That did it. The words landed. Not just with us. With the room. Not fully understood. But heard. Conversation stopped. Just slightly. Enough. Daniel turned. What account, he asked. Finally. The question that should have been asked months ago. Claire didn't answer immediately. Because now, there was no version of the answer that stayed contained. No way to keep it inside the structure she built. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't my reveal. This was her structure. Responding to pressure. And structures don't lie. They just fail. Claire inhaled slowly. Then said, it's just a processing delay. The same line. The same phrasing. But now, it didn't hold. Not the way it had. Before. Because the room had changed. The silence had changed. The awareness had changed. Daniel looked at her. Then at me. Then back again. Confusion. Real this time. Not passive. Not distant. What does that mean, he asked. No one answered immediately. Because now, the truth was no longer hidden. It was just unspoken. And in moments like this, silence doesn't protect you. It exposes you. I adjusted my posture slightly. Not stepping forward. Not stepping back. Just present. Because this wasn't about stepping in. Not yet. This was about letting the moment reach its natural point. The point where everything becomes clear. Without anyone needing to explain it. Claire looked at me again. Not with control. Not with confidence. With calculation. Trying to find a way out. A way to restore order. A way to regain position. But there wasn't one. Not the way she needed. Not without me. And that was the moment she finally understood something. Something she should have seen from the beginning. You can remove someone from a table. You can remove their name. You can even remove their presence from a room. But you cannot remove their role. If everything still depends on it. And now, everyone was starting to see exactly what that role was. No one moved. Not the planner. Not the DJ. Not the guests closest to the table. Even the music stayed low. Like the room itself was waiting. Waiting for something to be said. Or done. Claire stood in front of me. Still. Composed on the surface. But no longer in control of the moment. Not fully. Daniel looked between us again. This time, not confused. Not entirely. Something else had replaced it. Awareness. Slow. Uncomfortable. But real. What account, he asked again. Quieter now. More focused. Claire didn't answer. Not immediately. Because now, there was no version of the answer that stayed simple. No version that protected the structure she had built. The planner spoke again. Carefully. Choosing words. This event is still pending final authorization, she said. Clear. Professional. But now fully within earshot of the surrounding tables. That was enough. A few more heads turned. A few more conversations paused. Not chaos. Not embarrassment. Just attention. And attention changes everything. Daniel's eyes shifted. From Claire. To the planner. Then finally, to me, Mom, he said. Different this time. Not distant. Not automatic. Present. I held his gaze. Calm. Steady. And then I said, the account they're waiting on is mine. No raised voice. No emotion. Just clarity. The words landed quietly. But they didn't stay quiet. Because truth doesn't need volume. It just needs space. Daniel blinked. Processing. Claire didn't react immediately. That was her instinct. Hold position. Delay response. Control the moment. But the moment was already moving. What do you mean? Daniel asked. I didn't rush. Didn't fill the silence. I let him sit in the question. Then I answered. I said, the funds being used for this wedding came from my account. Another pause. Longer this time. Because now, the structure had been named. Not implied. Not suspected. Named. Claire finally spoke. That's not accurate, she said. Still calm. Still measured. But thinner now. Less certain. I looked at her. Not to challenge. Not to argue. Just to respond. It is, I said. And left it there. Because explanation wasn't necessary. Not anymore. The planner glanced down at her tablet. Then back up. Confirming. Without saying it directly. Daniel turned toward Claire. Is that true, he asked. No accusation. Just need. Need for something solid. Something real. Claire held his gaze. For a moment. Too long. That hesitation was louder than any answer. It was temporary, she said finally. There were adjustments. Adjustments. I repeated quietly. Not interrupting. Just clarifying. Daniel's expression shifted again. Not confusion now. Recognition. Because he had heard that word before. From her. From documents. From conversations he hadn't fully followed. What kind of adjustments? He asked. Claire didn't answer immediately. Because the answer was no longer simple. No longer contained. And once said, it couldn't be taken back. I stepped slightly forward. Not to take over. Just to be present in the space that had opened. The kind that moved money, I said. Calm. Direct. The kind that assumed no one will question it. No anger. No accusation. Just truth. Claire's posture changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The control she held was no longer complete. You agreed to support the wedding, she said. Her voice steadier now. Rebuilding. Reframing. I did, I replied. And I did. That mattered. Because this wasn't about denial. It was about clarity. But support, I continued, doesn't mean removal. The word hung there. Removal. Because that's what this had been. Not just financial. Personal. Deliberate. Daniel looked between us again. Slower this time. Putting things together. The transfers. The planning. The distance. The seat. Or lack of one. Do not seat. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. The meaning was already in the room. Claire's voice lowered again. This isn't the place for this conversation. That was true. But it was also too late. Because the conversation had already happened. Not through words. Through structure. Through action. Through consequence. I nodded slightly. You're right, I said. And for a second, she looked relieved. Until I added, it's already been had. That's when it landed. Fully. Not just for her. For everyone close enough to hear. The planner stepped back slightly. Not leaving. Just giving space. Because now this wasn't about logistics. It wasn't about scheduling. It wasn't about flow. It was about truth. And truth doesn't need coordination. Daniel exhaled slowly. Ran a hand through his hair. Looked at the floor. Then back up. This should have been clear, he said. Not to me. Not entirely to Claire. To the situation itself. To everything that had been left unsaid. Claire didn't respond. Because there wasn't a clean response anymore. Not one that restored control. Not one that returned things to how they were. Because how they were had been built on something incomplete. Something assumed. Something now exposed. I didn't step forward again. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't demand anything. Because I didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already visible. The account. The transfers. The control. The removal. All of it. In the open. Without spectacle. Without drama. Just there. Claire looked at me one last time. Not with confidence. Not with control. With understanding. Finally. Because she saw it now. Clearly. Completely. She hadn't removed me from this event. She had built it around me. And then tried to pretend I wasn't part of it. And that is not something you can maintain. Not when everything depends on it. Not when the person you removed decides to stay. No one spoke for a moment after that. Not Claire. Not Daniel. Not the planner. The room didn't erupt. It didn't fall apart. It just shifted, quietly, like something invisible had finally been placed where it belonged. The DJ didn't announce anything. The music stayed low. Guests resumed their conversations slowly, carefully, as if they understood something had happened, even if they didn't know exactly what. Emily stood up from her seat. That was the first real movement that mattered. She looked toward us, toward the small space where everything had just unfolded. Her expression wasn't confused. Not entirely. It was searching, trying to understand why the moment felt different, why the room felt different, why something beneath the surface had changed. She walked toward us. Not quickly, not dramatically, just directly. "Grandma," she said. Soft, careful. I turned to her, and for the first time that evening, I let my expression soften, just a little, because none of this was meant for her. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. Her eyes moved between me and Claire and Daniel, sensing the distance, the tension. "What's going on?" she asked. A simple question, the kind that deserves a simple answer. But this wasn't simple. Not anymore. Claire stepped forward slightly. "I'll explain later," she said. Quick, controlled, trying to contain it again, to move it out of the room, out of the moment. But some things don't move once they've been seen. Emily didn't look at her. She looked at me, waiting, not demanding, just trusting. I held that gaze and chose carefully, because this wasn't about exposing anything. Not now. Not here. "It's all right," I said gently. Everything just needed to be clear. She frowned slightly, not understanding, but accepting, because she always had. That was who she was. She nodded slowly, then reached for my hand, held it. Warm, familiar, real. "I'm glad you're here," she said. Simple, honest. And for the first time that night, that mattered. Not the tables, not the seating, not the structure, just that. I smiled. A real one this time. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. She squeezed my hand once, then stepped back, returning to her place, to her moment, to the part of the night that still belonged to her. And that's how it should be. The planner approached again, carefully, respectfully. "Are we able to proceed?" she asked. This time, she was looking at me. Not Claire, not Daniel, me. The shift was complete. I met her eyes, then nodded. "Yes," I said. Simple, clear, final. She didn't ask anything else. Didn't need to. Because authority doesn't need to be explained once it's recognized. The DJ stepped forward again, voice steady. "All right, everyone. Thank you for your patience," the room responded. Quickly, easily, as if the interruption had never happened. But it had, and the people who needed to see it had. Claire stepped back, just slightly, not removed, but no longer at the center. The folder was still in her hand, but it didn't hold the same weight anymore. Not here, not now. Daniel remained where he was, quieter, still processing, still understanding, and for the first time, not looking to her for direction. That was enough, more than enough. The speeches began, one by one. Words about love, family, commitment. They sounded different now, not false, just clearer, because now I knew exactly what stood behind them, and what didn't. I didn't move to a table. No one brought me a chair. No one needed to. Because position isn't something you're given. It's something that becomes visible when everything else is removed. I stayed where I was, not at the center, not at the edge, just present, and that was enough. Later that evening, as the lights dimmed and the music softened again, I walked toward the exit, quietly. No announcement, no attention, just movement. Claire noticed. Of course she did. She always notices. She stepped toward me, stopped a few feet away, not close enough to speak privately, not far enough to ignore. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she nodded, small, controlled, but real. Not apology, not acknowledgement, something else. Understanding. Finally, I returned the nod. Nothing more, because nothing more was needed. Daniel approached a second later. "Mom," he said. Soft, different. I looked at him, really looked. "I didn't know," he added. I believed him. Not completely, but enough. "I know," I said. And that was the truth. Because silence doesn't always come from intention. Sometimes, it comes from convenience. He nodded slowly, as if that answer meant more than anything else I could have said. I picked up my clutch, adjusted my coat, and turned toward the door. No one stopped me. No one needed to. Because this wasn't leaving. Not in the way it might have looked at the beginning. This wasn't being removed. This was choosing to step away. There's a difference. I stepped outside. The air was cooler, quieter, cleaner. I paused for just a moment. Not to look back, not to reconsider, just to feel the shift. Because something had changed. Not the event, not the people, me. At the beginning of the night, I stood at the entrance, holding a card that said, "Do not seat." And I smiled, because I thought I had been erased. By the end, I understood something much simpler. They didn't remove me. They tried to place me somewhere smaller, somewhere quieter, somewhere easier to ignore. But they built everything on something they didn't fully control. And that was their mistake. Because you can change a name tag. You can change a seat. You can even change the way a room sees someone. But you cannot change what something depends on. I walked to my car, opened the door, sat down, and for the first time that day, I let the silence settle. Not heavy, not empty, just complete. Because the moment had passed. The truth had been seen, and nothing needed to be said again. I started the engine and drove away. Not rushed, not emotional, just finished. Because in the end, I didn't need a seat.